Good afternoon, New Orleans, and welcome to Put Housing First. I'm your host, Andronika Morris, and I am here live today as we are every Tuesday at 12 p.m. on WBOK 1230 a.m. to talk about what it means to put housing first. Thank you for joining us today. We are live today in the studios. I'm going to keep saying this in this newfangled technology of live broadcasting. And we're broadcasting on the radio as well as on the internet for those of you who are listening in other parts of the state or other parts of the country. So we're this after last week's show, we are really excited about this week's show, and we're a little behind, I feel, from a narrative perspective. Last week's show, where we had an amazing guest on, Ms. Barnes, to talk to us about from someone who's from California, who works with Fair Housing Group in California, to talk about the California wildfires and the impact. That's a show we wanted to have a week prior, but we could not have because of the blizzard that shut down most operations here in New Orleans, including our friends here at WBOK 1230 a.m. Although people were tuned in live to WBOK 1230 a.m. to hear about updates on the blizzards. Shows like Put Housing First, we took a pause during that time period. So we had to push everything back, right? So we talked about the wildfires last week, still on point. Thankfully, late last week, the situation has come under control. Mother Nature stepped in, sent them a little rain, and the efforts of the Los Angeles firefighters and all of the volunteer firefighters and particularly those firefighters who are incarcerated, who are out there working to protect people, help save lives. They were able to battle that fire and get it under control last week. But it was really timely that we had our guest on last week to talk about this issue. This week's show, we went ahead with Ms. Barnes's taped segment, even though we desperately wanted to be on the air live last week to talk about the topics of this week's show, which is how are we doing under the Trump administration? How are they doing as it relates to the goal and our stated mission to put housing first in order to put people first. We're 15 days today into the Trump administration, and during our partners at the Greater New Orleans Housing Alliance issued a scorecard for the presidential candidates. Former Vice President Kamala Harris, then candidate Kamala Harris, got an A, and then Citizen Trump or former president, now president again, Trump, got an F, and we're seeing that play out in the first 15 days, unfortunately. So if you've been living under a rock, not paying attention, a lot of people have tuned out deliberately, have tuned out intentionally, feeling like this administration was going to come in and cause a lot of chaos, to get a lot of clicks, to get a lot of talking, to get a lot of chatter. That certainly happened, but they've also had a lot of impact in 15 days today. And that impact has been wholly negative as it relates to whether or not they've put people first by putting housing first. So we are going to go over what's been happening. We're going to recap some things. We're going to take some callers. We've got some questions from people who have already kind of reached out to us and said, hey, can y'all break this down? And can you talk about this? We've seen partners respond, other states respond. And so we want to break this down about what it means for housing. And going to be upfront with you, some of the biggest questions are we're not sure. We don't know the answers to. When it comes to housing, I've been asked this question a number of times, been very frank about it. We have very large concerns as it relates to housing when it comes to the grant dollars that the Trump administration is seeking to withhold from grant partners. These are cities and municipalities and states, as well as grants issued to nonprofits, grants issued to communities. And so what does this actually look like? How is this going to actually play out, and how it relates to housing? So the biggest programs that we are aware of, there are two large programs that the people of Louisiana are most concerned about. The people of New Orleans are concerned about as it relates to housing. One is the Low Income Housing Energy Assistance Program, or LAHEAP, that's managed by the Louisiana Housing Corporation. It is the largest program that they manage. They put out about 27 to almost $28 million annually. That program increased significantly under COVID, um, making sure that this is a program managed by several of our nonprofit partners across the state. Here in New Orleans, it's managed by our partners at Total Community Action. And these grant dollars are issued to low to moderate income folks who need help paying their utility bills. So, fairly basic, straightforward program, especially for those of us who live in Louisiana, and we understand how high our energy costs are, our utility costs are. Um, there has actually been coincidentally a really amazing report done by the Legislative State Auditor's Office, where they have laid out the fact that our utility systems at the state level have us paying an unfair amount in utilities, despite the fact that we have the lowest rate on record. That is meaningless because we have low rates per kilowatt hour, right? So what the utility companies charge you for electricity, that base price is lower than other states, although that's something that's been changing when you look at all the fees that the utility companies have been adding on. And if you want to join this conversation, call the talk line at 504-582-9422, 504-582-9422. So, but with the two regulatory bodies that operate here in Louisiana, so in New Orleans, our utilities are regulated by the New Orleans City Council. That's right. For those of you who did not know, the 7 members of the New Orleans City Council act as the regulatory body of our utilities. That's electricity. That's other utilities like cable and internet and things like that. They regulate those things. They are the regulators. They have a small staff that helps advise them on this. Most of they have a set of contractors who do the lion's share of advising, because utility regulation is very complicated, and the city council members do have other responsibilities. And then we have the Public Service Commission that regulates everything outside of Orleans Parish. So if you're friends and neighbors or if you're listening and you live in Jefferson Parish or the River Parishes, or Lafayette or Lake Charles, Alexandria, Shreveport, Monroe, or anywhere in between the North Shore, you're regulated by the Public Service Commission. And the Public Service Commission is a 5-person body. They have a much larger staff than the New Orleans City Council does. But the Legislative Auditor's Office did an analysis on their efficacy, on some of their issues and challenges, and how is it impacting us. And so the report, documented some things that some of our partners have been talking about for years. The Alliance for Affordable Energy, the state's watchdog group for utilities, and specifically they've been, working on electricity specifically, and how we're addressing this issue. They've talked about this for years, that yes, our utility rate, the base rate is low, but our consumption is high. And one of the things that the Alliance has been talking about and working with partners to make sure people understand is that we can't necessarily blame the victim. It's easy to say, well, there's a low rate of what you're getting charged per kilowatt hour, and it's on you that your light bill is more than you can afford because you need to turn off lights when you're leaving a room, right? You need to make sure that you're not leaving your front door open when you're running your air conditioner, that you're not being wasteful. But what the Legislative Auditor report documented, so this is, the Louisiana Office of Legislative Auditor's Office, what they documented is part of the problem is the quality of our housing stock, or lack thereof. And how that causes, no matter what someone does, in a lot of instances, they can't manage their consumption. Sometimes it's beyond their control. And then you also have the effects of climate change. Now, the report doesn't go quite that far in saying that explicitly, but it does talk about heat waves and cold fronts that have been pushing us to record-breaking temperatures in both directions, and how that has impacted our utility consumption. So we got a 1-2 punch hitting people, right? When it comes to their utilities, when it comes to specifically their energy consumption around electricity and fracked gas that they bring into their homes, right? That 1-2 punch is that making it worse, no matter what the base costs are, is the fact that their homes are likely to be energy inefficient, older homes that have been taking damage because of climate change, or that really weren't built for these extremes, right? We've been talking about this for the last 20 years, and we saw it last week, a week before last, sorry, with the blizzard. People were worried. We still have people, after all the money that's been invested in our housing stock post-Katrina, we still have people having to run water when temperatures drop below freezing. We still have people whose pipes burst. We still have people who don't have adequate heating in their home. The blizzard cost, last records that I looked at saw that there were 2 deaths as a result of it. That's not bad. It's still 2 deaths too many. 2 people died, and they were the most vulnerable. An 80-year-old died of what was categorized as hypothermia. That means an elderly person who's more vulnerable to heat, extreme heat and extreme cold, was in a home that they could not keep heated well enough till they died in their own home at 80 years old. And the second death was here in New Orleans. A 60-year-old woman died as a result of a fire as she was trying to keep warm. And the firefighters think that the space heater she was using to keep her home warm was too close to her bed. This happened overnight, was too close to her bed, and she died as a result of the fire. And compounding that tragic situation were the fact that her neighbors, she lived in a double, and so the entire home was engulfed in flames. And her neighbors, who thankfully weren't home at the time of the fire, they are now homeless. So this is the extreme. So people, our homes are not suitable for this. We had to triple the amount of warming centers we brought online. We were bursting at capacity with the homeless shelters. The governor's team had to scramble to bring in even and spend more money to keep the tin can on France Road heated because temperatures were unbearable. And again, so this is also part of the problem, where we're housing people, how we're housing people, and the quality or lack thereof of those structures, and what we can do about what investments we should be making, right? What investments we should continue to be making, what dollars we need. And so LAHEAP is a great program because in addition to just helping people pay their utility bills during these crises, and honestly, when it's a 1-2-3 punch, and I mean we might go 1, 2, 3 plus 4 plus 5. I mean if we're gonna run the whole list, but let's just stay with the 1-2-3 punch. The third punch, so we've got lack of quality in our housing stock, and climate change making things worse and exacerbating the situation. So we're having extremes that are testing these already compromised systems. And the third piece is, even on a regular day, on a day like today where the weather is temperate and moderate, it's not going to be too hot, it's not going to be too cold. The fact of the matter is folks don't make enough money to pay their light bills even on a day like today. Folks who are making minimum wage, the most vulnerable, like seniors who are trying to get by on Social Security and small pensions, children, families with small children struggle to make ends meet. Single people who are just making $7.25 an hour can't make these numbers work, right? So, and when you add all of that up, that's most of the people who live here. That's most of the people who live here in Louisiana, and most of the people who live in New Orleans can't make these numbers work, right? So LaHeap comes in and says, we're going to help the most vulnerable. We're going to help the folks who need the most help, and we're going to help them pay their utility bills. It's a really needed program. And also, LaHeap allows for exactly what we were talking about, those investments. So taking some of that dollars along with weatherization programs that the state also manages, the Louisiana Housing Corporation also manages, putting dollars together to create weatherization programs to help folks make the investments in their home or the home that they're providing to someone else. So if you're in the business of housing, you need to be able to access some of these programs. It's primarily focused on the homeowner or the renter themselves, but there are programs out there to help small landlords, and people need to be looking for those opportunities. We also see investments going into large scale development, right? So there's other money that comes to the federal government because the state of Louisiana spends exactly zero of its own dollars on housing. We're going to figure out where the governor got the $16 million from we know that the money came through GOSEP, the governor's office of the emergency management office, the disaster office for them. We know that came through that office because it was the emergency order tied to the terror attack on New Year's Day that allowed him to move $16 million into the hands of people who had not been procured through traditional processes. We know that that's how this is working. And so but otherwise the state doesn't spend any of our dollars on housing us, right? That's one area where New Orleans is another way that New Orleans is different from the state of Louisiana, where we're now getting ready to spend some of our own money on housing ourselves, not just the money we get from the federal government or funding programs that we get through the state that also come from the federal government, right? So the state isn't putting any of its own money in these programs. They're passing down the federal dollars. And what Trump has done is jeopardize those dollars. And these are open-ended questions so that the administrators of the programs can't move forward, and they don't know when they're going to be able to help people. And you've got folks already, this has already happened. There was a news report about this last week about TCA telling folks who were coming in to stand in line to get support, to keep their lights on, literally, right? A week after a blizzard, you've got folks who need help to keep their lights on. Because as I said, it's not just tied to the disaster. It is the 1, 2, 3, 4 plus 1, 2, 3, 4 plus 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 plus 5. I'm trying to I'm trying to use those who know, right? Y'all know what I'm trying to do here, and I'm not doing it really well, so I'm going to stop. I'm going to stop. Trying to connect everything to the halftime performer at this upcoming Super Bowl. If for those of you who didn't understand, because I made a mess out of that metaphor there. But the 1, 2, 3 punch, right? The 1, 2, 3 punch of houses not being in great enough shape to begin with, climate change, and folks just not having enough money to make this meet, even if the first two things weren't impacting them. So if you're living in a home or an apartment that has been renovated or built to our new building codes that actually do allow us to weather the everyday storms, right? And let us navigate the crises of climate change and are not in bad shape. Folks are struggling with that third punch to stay in that housing, to get that housing in the first place, right? Because that housing is going to be mostly, it's a lot of it's been created with some kind of subsidy, which means that it should be at a minimum over the last 20 years, those housing opportunities have been directed to victims of the last 20 years of disasters and catastrophe, be it Katrina to COVID, Ida to BP oil spill, right? There's been a lot of investments that says, hey, the victims need to get help. And where we've struggled is getting folks connected, getting them supported, especially recognizing where they are as a result of their what hurt them, what the disaster that rocked their world, that rolled over their lives, that in many instances pushed them out of the city or even out of the state, right? And then getting the chance to come home, them getting the chance to rebuild in their community, to choose where they want to be. So those are mostly federally, those are all overwhelmingly federally funded programs that Donald Trump has put in, and with the assistance of unelected officials like Elon Musk. And I'm not even sure how he's an unelected official, but he's not been confirmed by anybody. This is an office that doesn't exist. I mean, Governor Landry is entertaining similar antics, but at least he's kind of following the process. I mean, we're not sure if we're going to be able to go sit in those meetings that are being run at the state level, but we saw pictures of the meeting happening, so the first meeting happening. What we're seeing now with the Musk-Trump combo is just an onslaught of actions that have questionable consequences. So LAHEAP is one of the programs that's on the chopping block, and we're still waiting to hear what's going on. We're with bated breath waiting to hear what's next, to hear what the next investment, this investment might be, or if the resources are going to be allocated, and we're gonna continue to fight over this, right? But people need to know what they're fighting for, right? So people need to understand how this affects them. And if you're just now getting, I know I got my light bill last week. If you're looking and going, okay, that's a little higher, right? That's likely to continue. That's likely to be the case for this year. I know a lot of people levelize their bills, but you're gonna get some spikes with increased usage. If we have to sit at home for 3 days when people thought they might be going out of they could go out of their home, 3, 4, 5 days. People thought they could go out of their home. Forget about whether or not you work from home or not. You couldn't leave your house. Like, you were being advised to stay at home at a time when you needed, when utilities, when energy is not simply luxury, it is life-saving, right? We had 2 people die because they were trying to keep warm, and it ended with disaster, it ended with death, it ended with displacement. So LAHEAP is not just a poor people's program, it is also indicative of an investment strategy, or a disinvestment strategy that seeks to be a hallmark, or it seeks to become a hallmark of this Musk Trump combo that we have at the federal level. So that's the first program. That's the first housing program that we know of. And again, we don't have good answers. We don't have good information yet. We are on a wait and see if these programs are going to be reactivated. And people are taking steps, right? We've been working with national partners. I'd hope to have somebody from the Alliance on to talk about some of these pieces. We're going to try to keep doing that in the next couple of months. There isn't nothing that we can do. But one of the things that we have to do is we have to talk to our local officials about what they are going to do, right? So what resources can be made available to New Orleanians, residents of Jefferson Parish, residents of St. Bernard Parish, Plaquemines, folks who are listening to this broadcast today. What can your local leaders do to stopgap these? What dollars do they have? And again, in New Orleans, it's a very interesting time to have this conversation, because we're seeing extraordinary movement and investment in response to the Super Bowl. And the point around the Super Bowl, I'm not going to get into football and all the other stuff like that. I'm going to just be real with y'all and just talk about the fact that this is a time where we have to see the economic impact for real, right? Like, it can't just be trickle down. It also cannot be that we just take pride in how well our city does in hosting these massive events. And it can't just also be about culture in a very extractive way, right? It cannot just be about culture. We've got to talk about what we're expending, where the money is coming from, and what we are getting back and when. And if the federal government is depriving our citizens, our neighbors, of critical services that they need to live, that seems like a good place to spend any immediate dollars that we're getting in as a result of the Super Bowl. And we need to talk about who has control of those dollars and what they have decided to spend it on, and why it might not be what the people of New Orleans, who are hosting this, right? We're the hosts. This is the point. There would be no New Orleans if it wasn't for her people, because her people saved it after Katrina. Make no mistake about that. Please be clear about who fought and who won to ensure that this city was not abandoned, right? It was not abandoned. And those who think themselves really the masters of the universe, those who work in the economic development industry, the economy industry, and they think that they're the masters of the universe, they're not. They're not. Because, like, when you look at industries like the port, that Donald Trump doesn't seem to care about at all, as we're about to get in a trade war with China. So how many goods and services, how is that going to impact the port? Is the port going to be the economic juggernaut that it's been? Probably not. There's going to be changes that need to be made. They're going to have to address that. And we're going to have to help them, because our citizens work at the port. It is a part of our economy. But we have to be clear. We have to make sure that it is properly balanced, because we're talking about what benefits this community and its people. This is why we say put housing first. How do we stabilize folks to make sure that they're a part of this community, and then give them the opportunity to build, to pursue their dreams and their aspirations, and to live? Like, that's what we're talking about. And so we talk about, when we look at the other big program that we're concerned about, and we're still not sure about how it's going to land, is the Section 8 program. Section 8 program, and really all subsidized housing, like public housing, are also, now the Trump administration made some direct statements that those programs would not be affected. They also included Medicare in that. And as of the end of last week, the Medicare portals had not been reactivated, and states were missing out on hundreds of millions of dollars. Louisiana, the estimates were about, Louisiana went without $100 million payment last week, hoping to catch that up to get that done this week. But again, we're still not sure where that is. And so when we talk about the payments necessary to support the 20% of our rental market, almost 20% of the people who live in New Orleans and rent, do so with the support of the Housing Authority of New Orleans, a quasi-governmental agency that is operated in the confines of New Orleans Parish. The mayor appoints the board of commissioners, and it is like all housing authorities, its power and structure is rooted in the state of Louisiana's Constitution, right? So that's how we set it up, because it's quasi-governmental. But its funding comes exclusively from the federal government. through the U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development. So they have regulations, they have rules on how they access funding for their operations and for their program management and their investments that they are making, be it in the property, in the land that they own, and also with the vouchers, right? So these vouchers that go to help renters find housing in the private market. So you're talking about over 18,000 people who could find themselves without rental assistance in the coming months. And while 18,000, and those are 18,000 households, right? So we're talking about almost 35,000 people, not simply one person, 18,000 people. We're talking about closer to 35,000 individuals, families, households impacted by this investment. And so how in the world would we backstop that? Well, we've got to look at some different things. We've got the Housing Trust Fund that's coming up for next year. That's not going to close that gap. Maybe the first year we're lucky and we get about $20 million. That's not going to backstop payments of annual rent. That's about, that's over $150 million. If you look at what, the average rent and things like that go into. So yeah, that's a lot of money. That's a lot of money that would need to be replaced. But we also can talk about, but what investments can we make, right? What investments who can we stabilize? And what other money do we have on hand? Money that we have from previous disasters like COVID. We saw the city, we saw the city that, hold on one second. We saw the city and did get this. We saw the city get this into the city starting to move on and spending some of this other money, specifically on getting us getting us aligned with adding a new shelter to the city, right? So that we don't have people coming in and rounding folks up, that we do have services, that we do have shelters that can accommodate folks at various levels and various needs. And that's money, largely that's going to be funded with dollars that have been around for a while. So we're glad to see the city finally moving forward, but we also need to see that done quicker, right? And recognizing that we can't just be doing things because company is coming. We need to be doing things because folks are here every day, and we want this to work, right? We want this. We know it can work. We know that the Housing Trust Fund can work. We know that these programs that the Trump administration is trying to dismantle actually do work. They do have an impact. They do have a positive impact. We've certainly seen the negative impact as the potential of their loss. We've already seen that. We've seen people be turned away. So, but we also have to recognize that part of the argument that's being made is that these programs don't work well and therefore are useless. And that's an argument that a lot of people kind of vibe with, because everyone has an experience with government not doing its best. But I want to caution people against that before you get up on your high horse about this issue, because one of the challenges with that is, in the world we live in right now, in this the age that we are in right now, where folks don't like to be held accountable, that's not just in government, right? That you see that with telemarketers. You see it when you work with certain businesses. Certainly you see people disappointing right now in Black History Month, as you see folks moving away from the commitments of under DEI and being cowards under this new regime. You see regular people disappoint all the time. We have got to move to a place where we can hold each other accountable. We have got to talk about this, and say, like, this is how it's working. This is what we need to be doing. And it can work. And when people make mistakes, because we've got human beings inside of this, people are going to make mistakes. I think one of the challenges that we have is that there's a difference between a mistake and a choice. And so if something goes wrong, you want to extend some grace because someone made a mistake. Depending on the severity of the mistake and what needs to happen, that's totally fine. But when someone chooses to do harm, when someone chooses to disinvest in a community, when someone chooses not to wield the power they have been given, then we got to hold them accountable. It's again, folks have a tough time with this because none of us are perfect. Not nary none of us. Not nary one of us, right? I make mistakes every day. I made several in the middle of this call. I mean, in this hour, we're gonna make a few more. That's okay. That's okay, right? It does not mean that you don't keep trying. It doesn't mean that we don't keep moving forward, right? And it doesn't mean that you can't acknowledge that mistake and resolve to do better. And you might make the exact same mistake again, right? It's if you are going to work at fixing it, you cannot change what you refuse to acknowledge. And so this is the issue. This is the big problem, right? So we need to be talking about how we move forward and how we hold each other accountable at the local level, because the mistakes, and let's go ahead and grant everybody grace and say, locally, let's just keep it confined first to the city of New Orleans, and we're going to go to the Jefferson Parish and Plaquemines and everybody who's conceivably in the sound of our voice from WBOK's transmission. And even those of you who are listening online, think about your community. Think about the folks you have empowered to support you as you are in your community. That could be the businesses that you patronize, the people you have elected, the place you choose to work. All of those things are dependent upon power granted by the people. And they're the folks that you have the most direct connection to. Never again should anyone dismiss the power of the presidency after the last 15 days, right? With like anybody who thought it doesn't matter, you were wrong. You made a mistake. You were wrong. So but there is still power locally. There is still the ability to bring about change locally, to protect from those shenanigans. So what are we going to do locally? Who are we going to push locally? How are we going to act? And so thinking about when we say put housing first, these two big programs, the Section 8 program and LAHEAP, where are our local responsibilities, right? And where are, and so that's the mayor, that's the city council. Some of this is conversations we need to have with our legislators, especially if you're talking about how the state's going to continue to be involved or whether they're going to continue to be involved. And we just had a conversation about this in an earlier meeting. It is on us to not accept their nonsense, right? If you end up having a conversation with an elected official about an issue that you care about that has been impacted by this executive order, and it's going to be impacted by these tariffs, and all of it's going to be impacted in some different kind of way, or if it's just about climate change and the most recent disaster, or you're concerned about whether or not you're going to get your fair share of the Super Bowl investments, and you're talking to your elected official, the person who you have empowered, or you're talking to a community leader who you have empowered, or you're talking to a business that you patronize that you have empowered, and they start running their mouth, well, you don't understand. but you don't understand what you don't understand what you don't understand. And I usually only say you don't understand the people I don't like, and I'm about to disrespect big time. I I had a conversation with someone who shall not be named. But again, someone who presumed that they had power, and this was part of the thing, right? This is a conversation. These are how these conversations usually go sometimes, right? These are people who think that they have power. Some of them are wrong. Uh, this person that I'm talking about is just a local business person who thinks he should be his desire should be paramount when we're talking about how city services work, right? And he came to meet with me with intent, the express purpose of confronting me about Housing NOLA's analysis on how much housing we need, right? And to tell me that he didn't understand, why our numbers said that we needed over 50,000 affordable housing opportunities, because he just can't imagine, you know, 50,000, the kind of investments, multifamily. He went straight for apartment complexes and things like that. He just couldn't imagine that all over New Orleans. And I'm like, well, one, that's because you lack imagination, because that's nowhere in 50,000 plus affordable housing opportunities does it say they all have to be multifamily. That's your lack of imagination. That's your prejudice. And he was taken aback at that statement, because I was like, because I'm gonna be clear. Like, sometimes I want to persuade and educate and engage folks, but when you're dealing with someone who thinks that they have power and they're trying to tell you that they're not going to use their power in the way to help the people of this city, I get a little cranky. I get a little cranky. I'm less than diplomatic in those instances. And so I'm gonna go, you don't understand. But and when he said, well, okay, well, what do you mean? I'm like, and I explained to him about affordable housing. And if you want to jump in and remind everybody, the people in New Orleans that do know what affordable housing is, call the talk line at 504-582-9422. But most of you know by this point that affordable housing is not a type of housing. It is not it's not a sort of building. It's not anything other than whether or not the people who live in it can afford it. And that affordability is quantifiable by a simple metric: whether or not you're spending more than 30% of your income on your total housing costs. If you are, you're not living in affordable housing. If you're spending more than that 30%, you're not living in affordable housing. And if you are spending less than that 30%, you are living in affordable housing. That's home ownership, that's rental, that's if you're staying with family, friends, and you have control, right? You have control. Like, you can leave, you can go home. They can't put you out, right? they can't put you out without going through a process. Then you have housing that's affordable. You have housing that's sustainable. And I explained that to this gentleman. He was quite confused. And I'm like, yeah, I know. That's what I meant. I knew you didn't understand. So that's why because you told me you didn't understand because of what you said, right? You came in here with this very fixed image in your mind, prepared to do battle with me about this, and you didn't know what you're talking about. And that is what a lot of our leaders try to do. They try to gaslight y'all when you're talking to them, right? Now, sometimes people don't know the ins and outs of various programs, right? They don't know all of the details, and they don't understand those things, but they do know. I trust this community to understand the impact and what's right and what's wrong, right? And there are not that people are not perfect, because you'll get people who will just kind of fall into respectability politics and just wish that people will pull up their saggy pants, stop cursing, stop using the N-word, stop listening to rap music, right? Stop doing stereotypically black things, and that somehow all of that is magically going to make your life better. It's naive, to say the least. And it's not the problem, because when people look at investments or when they make decisions, uh, this to disinvest, be they businesses or policymakers or elected officials, they very rarely look at those individuals and say, "Oh, all these people have got pants sagging, or they got this issue going on, and they're not using their money correctly, so we're gonna disinvest in their community." No, they look at the basic analytics and they say, in like a neighborhood, in the neighborhoods that make up New Orleans East, there's a whole bunch of black people over there, whole lot. Do they really need a grocery store in each one of those neighborhoods or each every one of those neighborhoods? Those businesses have made the decision to not make that investment in the neighborhoods that make up New Orleans East. And it's because it's a bunch of black people that live out there. Nothing else. Nothing else. That because the any negative character traits you attribute to people who live in subsidized housing or in apartments and things like that, those people got to eat. They need to eat. So they would be customers for grocery stores. They'd be customers for department stores. They'd be customers for restaurants. And a lot of them are choosing not to go in that neighborhood, those neighborhoods, because there's just a bunch of black folks out there. And so we've got to talk about how do we direct investment? How do we support investments that honors the people who've chosen to live in New Orleans East, who desire to still live in New Orleans East, and absolutely deserve to have vibrant, healthy communities, which include access to jobs and food and entertainment, and transit opportunities, in a way that makes sense. And where is it that our government needs to provide those things? And but the starting point is the quality housing that makes that neighborhood, that makes those folks residents of that neighborhood, and that housing is not only quality, but it's affordable. Because if you can't afford the housing, if you can't pay your insurance, if you can't pay your rent, if you can't keep the lights on, that housing isn't high quality, or it isn't. It's not for you. It's not meeting your needs. That's part of the qualitative analysis. It's got to meet your needs. So if you need assistance, if you need help, if there needs to be intervention, if there needs to be regulation is not a dirty word, especially when we're talking about utilities. We talked earlier about the fact that we're seeing that the Louisiana auditor, the legislative auditor, has found that our regulatory efforts are lacking. They can get better. They have to get better. They have to get better. Have to get better. Have to get better. That's it. That's it. That's what needs to be happening. So this is the starting pistol, or another starting pistol, right? Because again, this is not a surprise to the folks listening to this broadcast. A lot of you. I think a lot of people are I think more people are appalled at the ruthlessness of the Trump administration and how he's allowing Elon Musk to run rampant. No one elected Elon Musk. And, Musk keeps saying he's doing what Trump wants him to do. It's like, who empowered you? Right? Trump did? Okay, so it's a combo here. That is appalling. It is shocking to a lot of people, because I think a lot of folks didn't think that the president could have this big of a negative impact on their lives, because I think a lot of us spent a lot of time talking about the failures of government without recognizing that there are benefits. And we're the first one to say when something's not working, but we always, always, always have a solution. Always have a solution. So we're not talking about there are challenges with the Section 8 program. There are challenges with the LEHEAP program. There are challenges with the regulatory bodies of the New Orleans City Council and the Public Service Commission. Fix them. Fix them. And we have worked over the last few years to make that argument. And the people of New Orleans responded to that argument. I'm talking about the Housing Trust Fund, because a very similar argument was made by the opponents of many people who oppose affordable housing, many people who probably support what Trump is doing and say, let's dismantle some of these public services, and said that our Housing Trust Fund, which produced modest amounts of money, only about $3 to $4 million, like $4 million was the max. It usually was averaging probably two over the lifetime. It was probably like two and a half, almost $3 million annually, because we had the trust fund for about I believe it was like 40 years, and so when we got that, when it was coming to the end and it needed to be renewed, and the administration, the mayor's office played real games with getting it reauthorized, because they brought in a bunch of other things that people were like playing games with the library's money and other things that they were doing that made it seem like this was all kind of weird. So that initial effort failed. And then when they went back and separated, the council, responding to the need, went back and authorized a single ballot initiative to just reauthorize the trust fund as it was. And again, we were clear about the fact that it wasn't adequate. We were concerned about the management. There wanted to be changes, but we wanted to keep it so we could change it. And the argument was, no. You need a plan. We had a plan. You need better management. You need to not do all of that, blah, 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 blah. And really those folks just wanted the money gone, right? They did, even though it was only a few $1 million a year, they just wanted it gone. And they said so, and people responded to that and said, well, it's not really working, y'all, and let's make them fix it. And we took them at their word and said, okay, let's make it, let's fix it. Now, we only lost by less than 1,000 votes. So this was not a slam dunk. There were people who responded to the argument and were just like, look, yeah, we need more. Yes, this isn't enough. We don't want to lose the little bit that we have. There were people who responded to that argument, but slightly more people said, I'm not sure. I don't like this, the way this is going. And one big problem that we acknowledged that it had was it was tied to property taxes. So even though it was the smallest property tax we had, you had people in their taxes paying into this small fund, right? That's why it was so little money, because of where it was a standalone tax, a millage. So, and again, that was significant to us, that people were still willing to entertain keeping it on as a tax. But we got slightly edged out. It was just too many things working against us. So we said, let's figure out how to do this right. Let's talk about the fact that we needed more money, and we could not ask the people who were struggling, right? Homeowners and renters, and just so everybody's clear, renters contribute to property taxes, because that's where their landlords get the landlords get the money for property taxes from rent. That ain't magic. They don't put any of their own money. It's their own money, in that it's the revenue from their rentals that they use to pay for that business, right? So it's just like we contribute to the local grocery stores paying their property tax when we go patronize them, because they take the money they make to pay their property taxes. So renters absolutely contribute to property taxes. So do homeowners. And so we said we couldn't keep doing that. But what we could do is say that there's a lot of money coming in already, and some of it must go to housing. the money that from events like Mardi Gras and Essence and the Super Bowl and all these other things. Like, let's talk about getting some of that money and some of the property taxes that are already being collected, right? That people have already agreed to. Some of that money, the general operating money that funds this city, some of that's got to go towards housing. And we've got to talk about having more of it. So it's going to increase. The initial estimates are going to be going from that 3.5 million to 17 million at the low end in the first year. That's a significant increase. That's the kind of contributions that we need to be making. We studied that. We researched it. We looked at the math. We looked at the needs that 55,000 that man who thought he knew city services didn't think we needed. We do need, right? What is reasonable for the people of New Orleans to contribute to that huge need, right? And the number is about that 2%. And we talked about who's going to run it and who's going to administer it and how it needs to be transparent, and people need to understand where the money is going, and they need to have some say so in how the money is going, and doing a version of participatory budgeting with these dollars. And you put all of that together, and you still with a plan, with a strategy, with an investment strategy, with the city and the government agencies coming together and saying, well, this is what we could do. And still those same people pushed back against it and said no. And the people of New Orleans said, okay, nope. There were some reasonable concerns here. Some of us went along with it. Some of us didn't. Most of us are going to say, we need this money. I want to stay in my house. I want to stay in my community. And that is how the people of New Orleans showed up to put housing first. And that is the kind of thoughtfulness and the kind of engagement and the opportunities that are going to be created as we move through these very, very troubling times. We're going to be back next week talking more about this. I want you to talk to your public officials. I want you to think about that. I want you to ask them, what are they going to do with the money we already have? What are we going to do with the money we get from the Super Bowl? And how is it going to put housing first for you? I'm your host, Andronika Morris. We'll be back next week. Same bat time, same bat channel on WVOK 1230 AM.